All right, you all, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. You have just finished watching our 5th installment of our series on youth empowerment and engagement of youth voice. And we've just finished watching a fabulous CIP talk entitled Leveraging Lived Expertise to Create Systems Change. And I'm happy today to be joined by Madison, Sandoval-Lunn, and Jennifer Rhodes, who just gave us the CIP talk, and we're going to have a discussion today. I want to encourage you all that are joining us today to please put your questions into the chat. We truly do want this to be an engaged discussion, so we welcome your input and your questions. So thank you, Jennifer and Madison, for joining us. We've already got a comment in the chat saying great CIP talk, and I absolutely concur. Welcome. So I want to start. I've got a few questions. You gave us a lot to think about during your talk. Jennifer, I was struck with you talking about dignity and compassion. But what I first struck me is you talking about the power dynamics that exist. And often the court experience for most isn't pleasant, that a lot would describe it as not friendly, not feeling safe, being confusing, that oftentimes that is punitive, it's culturally insensitive. You gave us 5 concrete steps to help provide a safe environment, but to promote dignity and compassion. And let's be honest, dignity and compassion are lofty goals, but they require action. They require for you to be mindful and to be conscious about it. So looking at those 5 steps that you gave us, can you give us a couple of examples of what that looks like in action in the courtroom?
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today also. And dignity and compassion being some high call, I guess. But really, when you're leading with that understanding of having dignity and compassion with families, it's coming to the table understanding that the system doesn't necessarily have something better to offer. And what the goal of the system is to provide stability and help that family, that youth function in a really positive way. And so to really think about what it might look like if you were creating a courtroom or a court setting that looked and rang true and people could experience it as they were dignified and that they were being shown compassion, I would say is thinking about it being a little less formal. You don't want this courtroom to feel like a criminal courtroom because it's a family courtroom. This is about a child and a family being at the table. Thinking about what it means when you walk into the courtroom and you see a judge in a robe up on their high stand looking down at you, and how that might feel for certain cultures, for certain ages, whether you're young or old or just different things like that. And so also thinking about what's on the walls in the room around you. Is there any kind of a safe space if the family or the child becomes overwhelmed and they need to go and process for a moment? Like what is being created in that environment? Who is there? And I think additionally, making sure that you take time to pause and check and see if the family or the youth has anyone that's not present there that they would like. And this is also coming to the table with the understanding of my talk about having lived expertise present and who that lived expertise and that professional is that has harnessed their experiences of their past into now a professional role to support this youth and family, and how they are showing up and really supporting the family in that environment. And the time that they've been allotted to spend with that youth and family to make sure that the family comes to the table knowing what they want to ask for, knowing what they need, and has someone really combing through that with them. I think that shows the family and the youth that they're cared about, that the court took the time, because we know that courts can be overwhelmed for time and pressed for that. And then I would say another way from one of my other points is showing dignity and compassion by really listening to the family. Sometimes we, in a professional environments, we will ask questions. We might need this or have to answer this question for our documentation, but really making sure that you're listening when the family is saying what they want and saying what they need and being realistic about what the court can and cannot offer in that time, but always focusing, like not shuffling papers, not reading these intimate family details while you have the family right in front of you and asking them those questions and using your ears. And so additionally, really thinking about how powerless it might feel and how just being heard, even if you can't come to a place of where the family just, does exactly this, or that the court does exactly this that the family wants, but just how are you connecting and really critically assessing what that feels like for the youth and family.
Thank you, Jennifer. Madison, do you have anything to add?
I think Jennifer did a really excellent job. I think it is very difficult for folks to be able to put themselves in the shoes of youth and families, many of which who may not have ever had that experience nor have been involuntarily asked to come to a court and have your entire family assessed in front of a courtroom of many people who you have no relationships with. And so, at a very minimum, it's making sure that youth and families are actually in the courtroom. And so you can't treat people with dignity and respect and share power if they're not there. And having someone serve as your proxy is not quite sufficient enough because, these folks, individuals are not voiceless. They have a voice. People may not always have the language to clearly articulate how it is that they're feeling or what is clearly going on. But with additional support and even with a peer support, that is one effective way of making sure that folks feel heard when they need to.
Thank you. So both of you talked about being heard, and Jennifer, I want to highlight that what you were telling us about listening is that for everyone, it's more than with your ears, and it's a full body experience in being present. And Jennifer, if you recall, a behavioral and developmental pediatrician that used to do a lot of training in Tennessee, she used to say you have 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth for a reason when it comes to listening. So thank you for reminding us of that. If you're okay, I want to shift the conversation to best interests. Jennifer, you alluded to in your talk that while you were in foster care, that someone imposing what they thought was best for you, that it had negative results. And so I think best interest based on perspective can sometimes seem like a double-edged sword. And so I do want to take a little bit time to talk about one side of that sword and tell me what you think the imposition of best interest, how it impacts youth engagement.
Yeah, well, and best interest is a blanket term that's often used, but really, what does that look like, and how can that be interpreted subjectively with every courtroom, with every young adult, with every family? And so, when you're thinking about what is the best interest, well, like we spoke about previously, who gets to decide what best interest is, and what does that actually play out like? And so, I don't think that anyone, when I was in care, looked at me and my 8-year-old self as that I would eventually age out of the system. No one imposed that view on me at that time. And so a lot of the decisions that were made around my life and about my life almost went along the lines of magical thinking that the system had something better to offer me and that I wasn't this high risk case, but actually my life did result in that. And, it's really just being realistic about what the system has to offer and not being too quick to look at the family and the child as being risky to allow them to do it, but really actually looking at the system and the court is a lot more risky because it goes on, this is someone's professional job. It's not their life they have to show up 24/7 in. For youth and family, it is. And ultimately, we don't know that there are better outcomes. And when you kind of when you look at the data, there are actually a lot of negative outcomes of being in the system and how that plays into being involved with other systems. So when you're just talking about who has the best interest, it's disempowering experiencing that as a young adult, but also, as someone who comes to the table with professional experience or with professional expertise now as well. When you see that happen and see that play out, and because it is coming from that power dynamic stance that the court knows what's best, and I'm just supposed to show up here and allow these things to happen with me or happen to me and to these youth and families without their true agreement, authentically hearing their stance and their voice and trying to partnership. And I think that's the biggest part, is coming to a place where is the system doing this because of compliance? Are they being enforced to do this? And then how are we imposing on youth and families because we are being asked to meet these certain standards for our state or for our courtrooms? And then where do you take time to pause and really think about what do I know about being system involved, and what does my choice impact about this long-term family, not just the youth as their single person, not just the family as this one family unit, but the entire generational and ongoing family unit. And so, just coming back to that point of, we don't want to ever be teetering on the line of we're doing what this family thinks is best for them, and we're only doing what the court thinks is best, but really coming to a place of partnership, hearing each other, knowing what's realistic, and finding a plan that works for both sides.
Madison, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little sarcastic, but we know it's probably best that we're vegetarians and vegans and probably not eating meat. It's probably best that we cook at home rather than go to, that we know that there's all of these judgment calls that we make as a society about what best is, right? And yet we live in a society of where people should be free to have autonomy in the decisions that are affecting their lives. And so I think where Jennifer raised, nobody wants things done to them, right? You all chose to come to this call today, not because it was compulsory, but because you had an interest in this topic area. And when people have a vested interest and have buy-in into a situation, they're more likely to work with you rather than feeling like you're an adversarial person trying to impose your ideas, your thoughts, your value systems, as well as your privilege in many ways, right? Of course, with all of the things that an individual who has the ability to go to, to get an education, work in this space professionally, and make determinations about what's happening to children, youth, and families. That's a very different place of privilege and power compared to youth and families who are coming to the table feeling very powerless. And so if there's anything that anyone has heard, and I hope I'm not speaking for Jennifer, is that we do not advocate doing things to people. To the most that we should do is we should be doing the work with people, in partnership with people. And in the best case scenario is returning power to the families and to youth, and making sure that they have the power to make decisions that affect their lives, and do so with support, so that we're not being punitive when something doesn't always work out. None of us have the power of fortune telling, so we cannot predict how these decisions will impact youth and families. And so, as much as we can, in returning power to youth and families is the best thing that we, in my opinion, the thing that most people would prefer.
So Madison, that leads me to something else that I heard in the talk, and you just saying that being empowered, the children should feel empowered to make those decisions. And you questioned in terms of who has the most power in the courtroom, and that oftentimes it isn't the child. And I think you would make the argument that the child should have the most powerful voice. Some people hear that statement and they think, you're asking me to let a child make decisions. And they think of child in a very limited sense in terms of, I think you alluded to sometimes, we know best. But then also what we keep training our judges and court staff on brain development and child development. So when you say that should be the most powerful voice, they should have the right to make the decision, but you're dealing with people who hear, you want me to let a child make a decision. What do you say to that? What is the response?
Yeah. I think people in positions of power and have been able to exercise power over people, it's really hard to relinquish power. And it's really hard to imagine a world in which you do not hold that power over an individual. And whether or not people believe so, it is in fact the case. When a government entity enters a home and physically removes a child from your home, for whatever the circumstances may be, and makes decisions about where you live, with whom, who you're spending time with, whether or not you have contact with your family, what school you get to go to, which friends you get to interact with, and what kind of normal life is okay for you. That is an ongoing sense of creates an ongoing sense of powerlessness, and robs people with the opportunity to make decisions for themselves and also to learn. I have two teenagers in my home, and on a regular basis, we talk about power sharing, right? And one example of this is one of my kiddos is ready to drive, be out in the world, driving the car, right? And if I never gave her that opportunity and space to actually be in the driver's seat with support, right, then she's never going to drive the rest of her life. She's going to need to rely on public transportation, right? And in the same way, we continuously call young people children, right? And in the context of the law and the court, we call them children and child, right? But they're not that. They are young people. They're young adults. They are transitioning into adulthood. And somehow, I think it's unreasonable for us to think that we can make decisions for these young people up into the 18th hour of their lives. And then somehow they're supposed to figure out housing, transportation, sustainability, family, and relationships when we haven't really given them the opportunity to exercise some of those decision-making skills with support and not in a punitive way. In many circumstances, I have seen people who retaliate against young people or punish young people because young people have made a decision that the adult doesn't agree with. But what people often forget is there's many adults involved in the child welfare system with many of their own ideas and perceptions about what's best, right? And so those are often competing, and really in general, it's the loudest voice in the room that gets to make those decisions. And what we're saying here is that we're making sure that young people have an equal voice about what's happening to them, and the adults in their lives are serving as trusted advisors rather than people who are puppeteering every moment, every aspect of a young person's life.
So again, it goes back to the power sharing. And so let me continue to step into the role of someone who's opposing what you're saying. And you talk about adultism, and I would even bring adultification on the other spectrum into that conversation. So let me take the role of someone who's saying that, wait a minute, you can't have it both ways. You trained me on brain development and child development, and you're telling me they can't appreciate risk. They can't do global thinking, big picture thinking. And I'm supposed to, as an adult, in terms of historically how we say adult, sitting on this bench, I'm supposed to impart that part of my brain that is developed into helping them, know what's best and make those decisions. What do you say? Where is the balance between recognizing autonomy, adultism, adultification, and brain development? It can be overwhelming to some. I think we can all agree with that. Where's the balance?
Yeah, I think it's more overwhelming for our children, youth, and families for sure. And I think it's actually not atypical for systems to think in very binary terms. It's either this or that, or none or both, or, and what's really important is really assessment, right? So when we talk about adultism is this strong held belief that I know better, therefore I'm going to impose whatever I want on you. Whereas adultification is really, it's not a belief, but really you're characterizing someone to be much older than they actually are. And on the contrary, there's infantilizing, which is treating them much younger than they are. And what people often, who understand trauma is that development will be impacted. The person's developmental growth can be impacted because of trauma. So this could look different for different people. So from my experience, I was probably more adultified as a person who was the eldest in my family and was more mature, but emotionally I might have been much younger because of my traumatic experiences. So there's a differentiation between all of those terms. We also know that adultification also is more typical for Black and Brown children. This is true in the prison to pipeline system, in which Black and Brown children are more likely to experience harsher treatment, more likely to be punished harsher than their non-BIPOC peers because they're seen to be much older, right? And so all of this to say, it's very difficult and it's really challenging. And the only thing that if folks are going to take away is you got to check with where the person is at in that moment. How are you feeling? What do you need? And that's no different than any human need, right? Regardless of whether a person's brain development is fully formed or not, does not mean that it doesn't suggest ignorance. I wasn't entering the system at 10. I was not ignorant to all of the things happening to me without my consent or my family's consent. I may not have had the full language to articulate. Now I do, which now I can attest that there were many things I had wishes and desires that were never clearly communicated to the court systems or the child welfare system that would have truly been in my best interest. And people sometimes just didn't spend the time. And as Jennifer said, we just are always pressed for time, as even here, right? We only have so much time to talk about a matter of such great importance, which is treating people as people who need support, guidance. And that's no different for adults as it is for young people. And many of you who are in your positions benefited from mentors and guides and teachers, right? And what I only hope is that we create a systems in which people feel supported rather than, acted upon by somebody else for their life.
Thank you. Jennifer, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. I just wanted to add to that, we're definitely, like, to just say very boldly, it's not saying that the child and the family makes the whole decision, but it's also saying that the court can't just make all of the decision either and impose their bias or impose, well, this family reminds me of this family and I had to handle them like this. And then this tunnel of, it's like we have to stay on tunnel vision. This family, what does this family need? What are they saying that they need? What do I know that I could help them better understand what's actually realistic now? But then also, what do I need to understand about where they're coming from so that I can also hear what they need that I can or cannot offer? I think it's really just level setting, being realistic. And then also to just raise something that we talked about in the development of this talk, and me and Madison being we're very passionate about this subject, is, coming into this, it's a child has to feel safe. A child has to, a young adult child has to have the ability to trust the environment they're in. And a lot of times a child may not view an adult as someone that they can trust or someone that they do feel safe around, or the family to feel like they can view the court system at that, because this parent or this family may be duly involved across the hall in the criminal justice system. We don't know. And so what is their experience of safety in the environment that they're in? And what is their experience with the world around them and their level of trust to even know and tap into who they are? We think about brain development being maturity and decision making developing at 26. What does that really play out like? Okay, so what do I need to help bring this child and this family and this young adult to the place where they can even gather that insight to tell me what they need? And if you're not creating a space of trust and a space of openness and equal respect, then they're not going to be able to verbalize or want to verbalize if they can.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions in the chat that I want to go to. So one question says, do you feel the complex dynamics of child welfare are best situated in courts with judges and attorneys arguing best interests and government's rights?
I think that's a great question. I think that we are at the precipice of creating systems or creating a world that we want to live in, right? And so I think that people are going to need to be in a space of engaging in real conversation on a regular basis of if we believe that what we've been doing, exercising best practice on youth and families, is really the best way, then it would produce the outcomes that we've been hoping to see. And we know that involvement in the child welfare system, including court decision-making, doesn't produce the outcomes that we want to see for the well-being of young people, but as well as the well-being for youth and families. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to think about how do we restructure these types of engagements and partnerships with youth and families and involve people with lived experience and provide them with training and support to really think about how do we restructure our system so we can be more responsive and really do work ourselves out of a job on a regular basis, right? It's not about more continuance and, 15, 20-minute court hearings because we're stacked, back to back with like all these cases. Is really thinking about like, if it doesn't work on that day, Like, it's okay not for it to happen, but we need to make sure that we prioritize it and prioritize it in a safe way. Could there be some other methods that in which we could arrive at these types of decisions in the community type setting and bring it to the court and show to the court that these decisions were made in collaboration and in partner with youth and families? And do the youth and families affirm that they were in fact involved in the decision making of their lives? So I think that, and this is all very hard to do in like 15, 20 minutes of a conversation, but I think that there are many great opportunities for us to restructure how we're interacting and working with people. And that starts with like on the ground level and figuring out ways based off of that community and what the community is saying is what would work for them.
Thank you. We've got one more question that I want to ask from the chat, and then we're going to go back to our discussion. How do you recommend those of us working within our states with lived experience, working within our child welfare systems, support those who oppose adopting these understandings and perceptions? And I think that question is referencing what we were talking about, adultism, adultification, brain development, and where's that balance in whose voice is elevated and who has really the power to be able to make decisions and be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, and thanks for that question, because I think this is something that's very relevant, and we need to know how to approach those who aren't ready to absorb this, or have a lot of resistance towards youth engagement and family voice being honored in those ways. And so, I think it comes down to, in my brain, I think of looking at outcomes, looking at what does the system truly can promise and provide to these youth and families that would be anything better than the family being able to be together or function in the instability within themselves or within what the system has to offer at that time. And really thinking about outcomes. We don't want to just be showing up in our communities and doing what we think is best for our short-term professional career in this role that we're doing, and we're guiding this youth and family, because we have to have you have to have foresight, and you have to have the thought that I'm not always going to be the one walking right here with this family or the one making decisions about their family. So how do I support them to get to a place where they can think about themselves with hindsight and foresight to express themselves in the current moment? And again, to go back to the outcomes side of it, like I said earlier, no one looked at me at 8 years old thinking that I would eventually age out of the foster care system without ever receiving permanency. And I say receive because it wasn't on me to achieve permanency. I was supposed to be provided that by the state who took me from my family. So really thinking about what can I offer, and what would be better than stabilizing a youth and family to their healthiest moment, and making that very real to these judges and court personnel, that you can't be completely risk averse, because harmony and family harmony is what the goal should be, not the court saying, well, I did the best thing I could here for safety and to not be held accountable if something terrible happens because of what I listened to what the family wanted and I helped support them in that. Where does liability fall? And really thinking through that, because I think that a lot of it's fear-based thinking. And if we operate in fear, then we're not really providing the family or the youth the space to really express who they are and what they need and how to get there. So we can, like Madison said, work our way out of a job, and this family can function on their in their own way with respect to, laws that will always be there, in a sense, but really, how do we hold ourselves accountable?
Jennifer, that's just really powerful what you just said, and I really want to take time to emphasize what you're arguing is that decisions from the court are being made out of fear, and what we know about training, fight or flight, and decisions and logic and reason are short-circuited when you make those decisions out of fear. So I just think that was just a really powerful way of looking at it. And I wanted to take time to acknowledge that and give everyone just such an opportunity to think and really hone in on what you said. So you all, I want to draw your attention in the chat that Jennifer and Madison provided us with a document and a guide that really serves as a supplement and gives you steps to consider. One of the first things in the document says, lead with the belief and understanding that young people are organizational assets and can help us transform the system. I want to say this to you all. I sincerely believe in what you've said, and all of my career have tried to practice that. There is no meaningful youth engagement without providing skill sets and professional development and vicarious and care for self-care as they do this work. So I want to give you an opportunity, and we only have a few seconds, we only have a few minutes left, but I want to give you the opportunity, if you could design a professional development program, because any other field, when you have experts and you have professionals, they get ongoing professional development. That should be the same for people with lived experience and expertise. If you could design a professional development program, what would that look like?
Yeah, so for me, and I definitely want to toss this over to Madison when we have, towards the end, but for me, I would say that lived expertise needs to be brought to the table with the standard training that those without lived experience have, but it being another level of support, another level of understanding that, we may come to the table with, neurodivergence, we may come to the table still unpacking our trauma, being re-triggered, and what that means to really be protected, supported, invited to the table, but continuously assessing that it is okay at this table and having infrastructure and support behind your role to assess when things need to be readdressed or readjusted. I think that, it shouldn't be the same training that is provided to someone that chose this as a career, because those of us that come to this field to give back to this field to make it better, I promise it's coming from a place of needing to heal something within us. I think that none of us want to work in this space because it is just, it was experienced so well for us that we want to make sure that we are not re-traumatizing others. I mean, for me, I think that in the roles that I've had that have been really impactful is having the support of someone who, was able to challenge me to think through what was unique to my experience and how was that also impacting the work I was doing. And you have to have someone that you trust and respect around you to help you check your biases in this work too, because those of us with lived experience bring our biases to the table as well. And so if you're not in a safe environment to really think through and process and learn and adopt the professional skills while interweaving your personal experience, which is how you get a professional with lived expertise, then you're not going to be able to continuously improve if you're not creating the space to assess, develop, grow, and giving that constant skills, compensation, ability to function, ability to absorb the knowledge. And then it's also serendipitous for me to be on a call with two people who have invested in my growth. One when I was younger and a new advocate, but then also now Madison being someone who has lived experience as well, who is now a professional with lived expertise. And the way that she has networked and engaged with me and triple checks my understanding of what I'm doing in a space, I think that speaks to that you've truly invited lived experience to the table, when then they can also then develop others with that have lived experience. And I just want to hand that over to you, Madison, because I know that you probably have some things to add.
And Jennifer makes it easy too. I think walking the talk is probably the most important thing that anyone can do in anything. And I think that, it's important to acknowledge that doing the work of engaging people just in general and sharing power and building partnership is not easy work, right? So, but unless you do it, you're not going to understand all of the nuances around like all of the skills that you may actually need in order to adequately provide support and coaching. So a lot of the things that I do in really developing young professionals is first, I will make the space for folks to do whatever they believe is their best, right? And then we have a conversation around opportunities for improvement. So there's always going to be a CQI conversations about like what worked, what didn't work, In some cases, some folks may need you to role model something. I role play. Jennifer and I role played like all the time. We have conversations about like what if it goes this way? What if it goes that way? Sometimes that's also really trauma informed because the anticipation of the uncertainty can also create a lot of unnecessary stress. And so, it's really taking the time and slowing down and finding this as an opportunity to create some systems change agents, right? Jennifer and I alone have created so much systems change and has impacted, I would assume, at least hundreds, if not thousands of lives over the course of our careers. And only because people have offered us peer mentorship and or just support on an ongoing basis, someone to talk to and talk things through. And I also think it's really important to like mutually explore expectations about what it means to do this work and some of the limitations of that. I often am okay with young people challenging me, but I will challenge young people too. Are you telling me what you actually think, or are you just repeating what you heard from somebody else, right? So I actually push and encourage young people to dig a little bit deeper and get to their truth and their absolute truth of what it means to do this work well. Those are just some like considerations. It's not all of them. But and spend time working with people who are doing this work too, and continuously engage in that peer learning. And as we continue to learn and build on these lessons learned, and we continue to spread the knowledge, which is power, we're going to do much greater work as a system to create systems change.
Thank you, Jennifer and Madison. You've given us so much to think about today. I want to thank our audience for joining us today. I want to encourage everyone listening today to re-watch the talk and to share it within your states, within your agencies, and let it be a foundation to build, to begin to do this work. I don't think there are any more questions in the chat, so I want to very quickly turn it over to either Jennifer or Madison to say parting words.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you all again for just coming and listening and being open to change, because we know change is hard, but really it's about taking that time to sit in the space. And then I hope that there's some valuable things for you to take back and apply to take action in your area, because, it's one step at a time, because we all are trying to get to a better place. And when you can really take that lived experience and get to a place of really not saying partnership is optional, but partnership is imperative for the system to change, then we can actually change it. It's not optional. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.